Okay, I'm going to talk about the last edition of Impact before Destination X this Sunday. This was kind of a weird show for me, sort of a one step forward, one step back kind of thing, and I'm going to start with the things I did not like this week. First of all, they had just a mess of a battle royal match with a bunch of people who apparently have matches at the pay-per-view that weren't important enough to be announced until tonight. They had Black Rain and Rebage once again. Black Rain and Rebage lasted longer in this match than the Motor City Machine Guns and LAX. In fact, Rebage was the second to last person eliminated in that match. And if you can't see what is wrong with that, then I don't know how to help you. Although, something I got a big kick out of. There was a fan in the front row sitting by the ramp that had a big orange sign that said Rebage on it. I love that. I mean, that was awesome. It made me feel like there are people out there somewhere that just might be listening to me, maybe. I don't know, whatever. I thought that was funny. Anyway, the other thing that bugged me about this show was the situation of the Angle Alliance versus the Unlikely Alliance. Basically, they had 3 singles matches, and whoever lost the majority of them would then have to go into Destination X with a handicap on their team, where one member of the team would then have to sit out of the match for 5 minutes. And the babyfaces ended up winning 2 out of 3, so the heels have the handicap on them now. This goes back to what I said about Vince Russo in my last video, okay? Once again, good idea, but the execution of it is lacking. Now, okay, take the main event, for example. I love the main event. You know, although I do have to kind of shake my head at the logic behind giving away a 6 sides of steel cage match on free TV only a month before you want people to pay to see Lockdown. But this was an excellent match. It got great time. It wasn't marred by overbooking, and there was only one commercial break during it, and it had a clean finish to it for a change. Thank you, TNA. My problem was with the 2 matches that preceded this main event. Okay, they had AJ Styles versus Kevin Nash, with Nash going over, and then they had Samoa Joe and Tomko, with Tomko going over. So Joe and Kurt Angle, the 2 guys who were going to main event Lockdown next month, just lost cleanly to 2 other people. And AJ Styles lost to Kevin Nash, which is just wrong on general principles. Instead of what they did, why not have AJ and Joe with Joe going over, and then Nash versus Tomko with Tomko going over? And then change the winner of the main event from Christian Cage to Kurt Angle, which would be very easy to do since the replay clearly showed that Angle hit the ground first. You know, that way we get treated to a Samoa Joe AJ Styles match, where the loss wouldn't hurt AJ at all after the wars that he had with Joe in the past. And then Joe and Kurt Angle both look strong going into their title match at Lockdown, and the babyfaces would then be at a disadvantage going into Destination X, which means Nash would have to sit out of the match for several minutes, which would then make it a much better match. That would have been so much better from where I'm standing, but apparently Russo just has his blinders on when it comes to Kevin Nash. I'm not really sure why. Having said that, the matches were actually quite good, except for the street fight, which was just sort of passable. And I do appreciate that the creative team made a very solid effort to hype up the main event of the pay-per-view, which they have not been doing for the last several months. So, again, one step forward, one step back. But I think the step forward was actually a little bit longer than the step back, so you're not quite there, Russo, but you're trying. And that's something. Also, they have created a pretty interesting situation for the Destination X main event, because the heels are going in with a handicap, but they're teasing that since Christian got destroyed by the Angle Alliance after the match, the babyfaces are going to basically have a handicap on them too now. And while this doesn't really change my feelings about the main event of Destination X, that it feels more like an Impact main event than a pay-per-view main event, it does make it a little bit more intriguing. One other thing I did not like about this show: Motor City Machine Guns are appearing on the MTV show Made, Saturday, March 9th. This was never mentioned on the show. They didn't plug it at all. And I heard that Saban and Shelley had some heat on them recently in backstage, but come on, TNA, just swallow your egos and do what's right for business. And yeah, that applies to LAX too. Give LAX a push already. Something that I would something I'd like to talk about they had an interview, a backstage interview with Angelina Love and Velvet Sky, where they said that they were going to give Roxy Laveau a makeover next week. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but this might mean that they're dumping the Voodoo Queen gimmick and going somewhere else with her character. And I was actually going to suggest that they do something very similar to this with Roxy, because if you remember that I said in one of my early videos that I thought that the Voodoo Queen gimmick was sort of hindering Roxy in the ring because she was so focused on playing a character that didn't really suit her. But if they get rid of all that and then they make Roxy over into a character more like Nikki Roxx, the lady in that One Girl Revolution video in my favorites, that is something that I would very much like to see. To see what I'm talking about, go to my favorites, click on the video titled One Girl Revolution. That's Roxy Laveau. Now, doesn't she seem like a totally different character and wrestler in that video? I mean, forget all the Voodoo Queen stuff. I want to see more of that girl. Another thing that warrants a mention here, I think, this TNA Rough Cut segment. Basically, this was sort of like a doco style video package about VKM as they recapped the beginning of their history. It was like the first segment of a couple, I guess. And this was very interesting, actually, because it was very different from video packages that TNA has done in the past, because it actually looked like it could have been a total shoot. This looked more like, something that you might see on a UFC countdown show, and I mean that in a good way. It almost made BG and Kip look halfway interesting. Almost. And I would really love to see TNA do more of these types of segments. So while I don't like the VKM were the stars of this thing, I think the TNA Rough Cut idea could be a really great way to build up feuds and angles and stuff if the writers would just use it to showcase talent that people actually give a rat's ass about. I would really love for them to do something like this with Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe to hype up the main event of Lockdown next month. And anyway, the rest of the show built up to the pay-per-view very well, I thought. They announced a new match for the show, a triple threat for the tag team, for the number one contendership of the tag team titles, Motor City Machine Guns, LAX, Rockin' Raven Faction. That's a potential show stealer right there. Also, they announced Booker T versus Robert Roode would be a strap match. And unlike a lot of the previous gimmick matches that TNA has done lately, this one actually makes sense because of Roode and Banks whipping Booker T and Tracy with the belts last week. And because Roode has run away from Booker in the past, so now he won't be able to. So that's good. And that was pretty much it. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good show. Definitely an improvement over the go-home show they had last month before Against All Odds. And the final card for Destination X turned out a lot better than I thought it would, considering that TNA all but admitted that this was just going to be a throwaway pay-per-view and that Lockdown was their main focus right now. The idea of a six-man tag main event is still a little weak, I think, since the world title and the tag team titles are not on the line. So there doesn't seem to be anything riding on the outcome of that match, which will probably make people a little less inclined to order the pay-per-view. So I hope that there's some kind of major storyline development that comes out of Destination X to make up for that. So the main event is still a bit of a question mark right now, but the rest of the card actually looks pretty good. So if you're thinking that you don't need to order Destination X, it's not going to be worth your time or whatever, I think this show just might surprise you. Oh, one more thing, real quick. Karen Angle did not appear on Impact this week, and I cannot even put into words how refreshing that was.